credit about, at least two things. I got to give him credit. Number one thing I give Obama credit for is he's been the best gun salesman on the planet, bar none. Obama, number one gun salesman. I just never will forget those stories about, excuse me. I'm sorry, folks. I haven't been the same since the red tide down at South Padre. But Obama, number one gun salesman ever. It's been amazing how those stories came out when he was first elected, how people rushed out and bought guns. So I think those articles and those stories had to give the New World Order boys some pause and a little bit of apprehension in them realizing what I think part of what's going on is they're actually building their own prison planet for themselves if they're not careful. And I think that's one reason they've really slowed down their agenda. But the number two thing I've got to give Obama credit for, what happened just last November of 2010, I really got to give him credit because he had over 400 plus years worth of tenure fired out of the House and Senate. You had a lot of long-term incumbents, especially Democrat side, and Lord knows there's plenty of incumbents need to be fired on both sides of the aisle. I tell you, I've been one of the leaders, one of the lone voices out there that we need to fire just pretty much every incumbent, and thankfully this audience I know is receptive to that idea, and I know they've heard that word that we definitely need to fire every incumbent, and the primaries are the Achilles heels. But Obama, I got to give him credit on that one, firing over 400 years worth of incumbents in the House and Senate in this last election because of his unpopularity. I tell you, I think he's created himself not only a lot of enemies on the right, which he's always had, but I think now into this upcoming 2012 election cycle, Obama has created himself a lot of enemies on the left from his Democrat past friends that ended up having their rear ends sent home from the House and Senate. So you've got most likely a lot of disgruntled people on the left and on the Democrat side that are ready to see Obama get fired as well. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because that mentality of, hey, he's our Democrat, we got a bunch of our people fired and they lost their jobs on Capitol Hill in the House and Senate. And, of course, a lot of staffers got flushed with that. So not only are you talking about the individual U.S. House members and senators, but you're also talking about big time, who knows how many millions and millions of dollars worth of payroll staff people being fired and furloughed as well. Now, many of these guys, they always don't fall too far away, and they end up getting gigs with some of the other people. As y'all know, one of the best economies in the United States is Washington, D.C., and it just seems to somehow keep on miraculously growing and getting bigger and bigger and fatter. And some of the highest incomes in the country are in Washington, D.C., and so I'm sure many of you guys that keep up with the economy have heard about that story. All right, so Obama gets credit for two big things, and hopefully in 2012, after the November election, I can give him credit for firing another 400 or 500 years worth of incumbents. That's what I'm looking forward to. Hopefully it'd be even more. I'd like to see 1,000 years worth of incumbents. And when I say these 1,000 years, what I'm referring to is the number of years that some of these House members and Senate members have been up there in these positions of power up in D.C. Many of these Democrats have been there 20 and 30 years, long-time U.S. House members that got fired, and that's how you come up with these cumulative figures of 400 plus years of incumbency. Okay. Back in the spring, changing subjects and changing gears into a different topic. Back in the spring, we were experiencing gasoline climbing higher and higher in price, and a lot of that was due to the activity in the Middle East that was going on, driven by the New World Order there in Libya and also in other Middle Eastern countries. And one of the interesting topics of research that I kind of got into and started kind of connecting the dots with was with regard to energy and power. And I've been meaning to get with Alex for a while and try to come on the program and cover this topic. And so me being a fill-in host for this hour till 7 a.m. Texas time is a perfect opportunity for me to kind of discuss what I learned and found out with regards to energy and how it's connected to the economy, connected to the New World Order and their agenda. And one of the things, like I said, that was going on back in the spring of 2011 is we did see accelerating and climbing gasoline, oil prices, diesel prices, etc. And I really got curious as to, what are all the things that they need to do? Lindsey Williams had come on here. Most of you guys out there in the audience are familiar with Lindsey Williams, and he was talking about where the NWO plans to take gasoline and oil prices, etc. And so I got interested in, okay, what all needs to happen? What all does the NWO need to do to control these prices? Because they have a lot of control over the prices of oil and gasoline, obviously, and they've demonstrated that. But at the same time, they are at the whim of the market a little bit, somewhat, because there's independent-minded companies out there, and there's the big corporate giants that are running gasoline and diesel and oil. There's the Exxons and the Mobils, and then you got the countries that have their own interests, and you got Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and all these different players that work together and disparately to end up controlling all these prices, and the NWO at the top of it all trying to pull the puppet strings one way or another about how those prices fall and how they go and who gets supply and who doesn't. But one of the things that really caught my eye was I was doing a little bit of research on stock issues and stock market things, and I ran across this story about a pipeline company up in Oklahoma, and the story was saying how that back in around March, April of 2011, that this pipeline company up in Oklahoma could not keep up with the supply of oil that was needing to be shipped out of Cushing, Oklahoma. There was a lot of oil being shipped out of Cushing, Oklahoma, and that they could only handle, I think it was about 10 or 12% of the supply of oil out of Cushing. And I was thinking, well, at first blush, the story didn't talk about exactly where the supply was from Cushing. They were just saying it was in Cushing, Oklahoma. And I was just kind of basically at the time, first blush on that story, thinking that, wow, they must be pumping a lot of oil out of the ground in Cushing or around Cushing, Oklahoma, to have that much of an overage in supply of oil. And lo and behold, a few days later, I thought, I got curious about that story, and I said, where is all that oil coming from in Cushing, Oklahoma? And what I found out on deeper investigation is that since the 2008 and probably before that, independent companies, entrepreneurs, speculators, different entities have built these big giant tank farms all over the country, and Cushing, Oklahoma is one of them. They built these giant tank farms, and they filled them up with oil, and they bought oil when it was cheaper, and they've waited for time to release that oil and try to cash in and make profit, of course. But also, I think these big tank farms all around the country, which, by the way, Cushing, Oklahoma, is supposedly only represents about 8 or 10% of the oil that is stored by such entities. So it's only a small percentage. So if Cushing, Oklahoma was needing to pump oil and not having the supply of the pipelines to get it to the Mississippi River Valley, where a lot of refineries are, to get it to the big refinery areas like around Houston and Texas, areas like that, they lack the pipeline capacity and could only handle about 10 or 12% of the oil coming out of Cushing. And that's just one of the locations, and that only represents about 10% of the oil that is stored in the above ground and underground tanks. So that, I think, helped slow down the increase in price at that time in the spring. But I'm also believing now that the NWO is probably going back to their drawing board and thinking, wow, we were really looking forward to having gasoline costing $6, $7, $8 a gallon in the United States. And I think they actually kind of ran into an overhead supply that they may not have completely realized, anticipated, and expected. And then on top of that, you've got the issues of oil being discovered all over the world. You've got a big Canadian find that they're trying to build a pipeline down in the United States, and I think they'll end up getting that done probably because there's a lot of lobbying efforts to create the jobs that those pipelines would bring out of Canada. And let me just say this up front. I love cars. I think men in general are somehow instinctively just love the automobile here in the United States, and we're blessed to be here in the United States where the automobile basically, when it comes to personal transportation, has been king and is king. And I think it's a symbol of American freedom. You know, that old Southwest Airlines, the symbol of freedom. They had the jet on the billboard, symbol of freedom. Well, I think the original symbol of freedom has been for us the automobile, one of the symbols of freedom. We've got a lot here in the United States, but the automobile definitely one of the major symbols of freedom. And I've often said that they'll pry the car out of my cold dead hands, kind of like that quote about the gun. You'll get my gun out of my cold dead hands. Well, that's the way it is with the automobile. I just love transportation, and I don't think it should matter if we drive a little Yugo or a little mini Daihatsu or whatever, or a Hummer. I don't think in America that's the issue of what vehicle we drive or how big it is or whatever. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is what are we putting in our tanks? That is where the monopoly is. And so that's why I've kind of delved into this subject about energy, and there's a lot more connected dots that are upcoming that I kind of found out on what's going on with the overall situation with energy, because the oil, like I said, they've been finding vast reserves up in Canada. You've got Lindsey Williams has talked about all the oil up in Alaska. You've got years and years, you know, by some accounts, 100, 200 years worth of oil up in Alaska. And like I said, me loving cars, I don't want to get out of my car. You've got more and more cities trying to put us on rails, actually, literally on rails, like in Austin and in many other cities. That's a big agenda in San Antonio, Houston, Austin, all over the world. That is a big agenda to get people out of their cars. And I'm not 100% against it, but when they want to put us out of our cars because of cost, then I really have a problem with that, because I think transportation needs to remain inexpensive and accessible to everybody here in the United States. And the agenda definitely by the NWO is to put us out of those cars. But the cost of oil is a key factor in whether we remain in cars. But the other key factor is what are the alternatives ultimately going to be to oil, because there will be alternatives, and there are alternatives. I don't think we've come upon the best alternatives yet. I think the alternatives yet to come, and maybe they're out there. You hear the stories about the 100 mile per gallon carburetors, etc. You hear all the different stories about ways to get better gas mileage. I really think these best methods of getting around our cars is yet to come. But for now, the NWO, obsessed with control, has really got their work cut out for them, from my perspective, from what I see. And it's a blessing for us that it looks like their work is so cut out, because you've got these massive oil finds all around the planet. You've got a lot of offshore drilling going on in Brazil, in some big giant oil field discoveries there. You know, we've all heard about Venezuela and their oil, and there's probably oil that they've yet to discover here in the Gulf of Mexico. More and more, because of the dilemma the NWO is in trying to control the supply and demand and cost of oil. You know, I really have to wonder about that the Deepwater Horizon accident. I really have to start to wonder about that, because it's interesting how, okay, we've got the Deepwater Horizon accident, basically slowing down and bogging down the Gulf of Mexico exploration. And you've got events like Fukushima that have damaged the nuclear industry. That may be the death knell of the growth of the nuclear industry. And I remember back, not that I'm necessarily a fan of nuclear, not really a fan of nuclear at all in a big way, because we've still yet to figure out a way to deal properly with the waste of nuclear. But it's interesting that